me? Let me know whether I am audible or not. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, all of you. On behalf of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University, we welcome all of you for this today's class. We have been discussing for the last few classes educational psychology. In today's class, we discuss some more points. Let me take the help of a PowerPoint presentation. I hope all of you able to see the PowerPoint presentation. Please, any one of you respond whether you are getting PPT. Yes. Yes, students, are you able to see the PPT? Host is requested to unmute the students so that they can interact. They can express their doubts, and also there will be an interaction in the presentation. Okay, let me start the session. So we are discussing educational psychology subject. So it is the discipline specific elective course. Let us see the meaning and definition of psychology first. When we want to understand educational psychology, first of all, we should be clear about what is the meaning and definition of psychology. All of you know that the subject to psychology, when it comes to the word psychology, it is a combination of two words. One is psyche, and the meaning of psyche is soul, and another one is logos. The meaning is science. So if we see the etymological meaning, psychology means science of soul. If we see during the development of psychology, it has gone through different meanings. Initially, it was science of soul. Later, it was treated as science of mind. In the later part, it was treated as science of consciousness. And finally, it became as science of behavior. So there are a lot of changes in the meaning and definition of psychology. You have to understand that originally the subject has started to study soul, but later in place of soul, they have taken mind, because soul is not visible. It is not possible to perceive soul. So they felt that it is better to take mind instead of soul. But when we take mind, then also same problem exists. Mind also, it is abstract. It is not possible to perceive the mind with the help of our sense organs. So in mind, some people, they felt that it is better to take conscious mind. So they defined psychology as science of consciousness. But whatever it may be, whether conscious or unconscious or subconscious, everything is abstract, one thing. And another thing is, when we study the consciousness, what about the remaining parts of the mind? What about unconscious? What about subconscious? Such type of questions arised. In the later part, that means in the 20th century starting, in psychology, the subject matter replaced by behavior. That means instead of soul, instead of mind, instead of consciousness, they have taken behavior as the subject matter. So now we can say psychology means it is the science of behavior. But in the later part, particularly in the years 1960s and 70s, again there was a lot of focus on the study of mind. So it was brought back into the mainstream of psychology. So nowadays, when we want to define psychology, we have to define it as science of mind and behavior. So both are important. Science of mind and behavior. You have to remember that. Next, when it comes to meaning and need of educational psychology. Okay, psychology is fine. What about educational psychology? Why we have to study educational psychology? When we take this particular concept, we have to understand that at present, we are living in the age of science and technology. Lot of advanced technological development we see in various fields. So there is a lot of development in science. There is a lot of development in technology. 21st century is known as century of science and technology. But when we see the development of psychology subject, we can say it is one of the youngest subjects and also one of the most influential sciences or influential subject. Why we call psychology as one of the most youngest subject? The meaning is, when first psychological laboratory was started in Germany, one of the psychologists by name Wilhelm Wundt, he started the first psychology lab in 1890s at Leipzig University in Germany. That is treated as the important milestone in the development of psychology subject. So it is hardly 100 plus years old. That is why psychology subject is known as one of the youngest subjects. Yet one of the most influential sciences. It is one of the youngest subjects, but one of the most influential subject it is. So it has influenced education in different ways and has given a new turn. It has given a new turn, a psychological turn to human mind. So when we take teaching learning process, a skillful teacher in this day of age, a great deal of knowledge of educational psychology is indispensable. So when we want to say a teacher, a skillful teacher, definitely the teacher should be empowered with the knowledge of educational psychology. So the knowledge of educational psychology is very important for a teacher. Another thing is, when we want to define educational psychology, if we want to see the meaning of educational psychology, what is the meaning of educational psychology? Simply we can say educational psychology is the systematic study of development of an individual within the educational setting with emphasis on teaching learning processes. So what happens in educational psychology means, it systematically studies whom? It studies the development of an individual, where in educational settings and more emphasis will be there on teaching learning process. So this is the general definition, a simple definition for educational psychology. Now, let us see nature of educational psychology. When we want to see the nature of educational psychology, we have to understand that educational psychology is a science. In the previous slides, I brought one point to your notice where psychology, in the word psychology itself, logos means science. So, science of mind and behavior. So, when we are talking about educational psychology is one of the important branches of psychology. So, when we say the parent subject, that means psychology as a science, definitely we have to say educational psychology also as a science. Here, the important thing is you have to understand that science means it is not related to just doing some experiments in physics lab or chemistry lab or botany lab or zoology lab. Most of the people feel that science means performing or doing certain experiments in labs. But you have to understand that science means not only doing experiments is an important part in science. Definitely we have to agree that. But at the same time, science means how we collect data, how we collect information, how we analyze that particular information, how we come to a particular conclusion. This also is a science. So science means it is not only related to conducting experiments in laboratory conditions, but it is also related to a systematic method of collecting data, observing the data, analyzing the data, coming to a systematic conclusions. So that is also science. So when we see science like this, when we see science from this perspective, then generally educational psychology fits into two frames. That means definitely it is a natural science. Natural science means like any natural science, we do a lot of experiments in psychology in laboratory conditions. That is why if you see any university department like physics labs, chemistry labs, botany labs, zoology labs, you find psychology labs in the department of psychology in any university. So psychology, educational psychology, definitely it is a natural science because we conduct a lot of experiments in laboratory conditions in the subject educational psychology. Similarly, when it comes to social science, like social sciences, take sociology or political science or economics, such type of social sciences, what happens means you may not find big laboratories in the departments, but you find many scientific methods of data collection. That means in social sciences, lot of scientific methods are applied, lot of scientific methods are used to collect the data, to analyze the data, to understand the data, to come to certain conclusions based on that particular data. So same thing we do in educational psychology also. That means in educational psychology, we conduct certain experiments in the laboratory conditions like natural sciences. Similarly, we conduct certain experiments in the field. That means we collect a lot of data from the society like any other social science subjects. So educational psychology is a natural science and also educational psychology is a social science. And another thing is we have to see educational psychology as a positive science. Positive science means take any positive science, you find a lot of facts in that. For example, if you take 2 plus 3, we give the result as 5. It is a mathematical science. Always 2 plus 3, 2 units of something, 3 units of something, it gives 5 units. So it is related to here quantification, numbers, it is a fact. 2 plus 3 is equal to 5 is a fact. If we take a chemistry, that means physical sciences, any physical sciences, for example, if we take water, if we put a bowl of water on stove and if we heat it up to 100 degrees Celsius, then what happens? Water will be divided into hydrogen and oxygen. That means two components we find. So water is nothing but it is a combination of hydrogen and oxygen. More specifically, we call it as if we take 2 units of hydrogen and 1 unit of oxygen, water is formed. So it is a fact. 2 plus 3 is equal to 5. It is a fact. So in positive sciences, we study lot of facts. Similarly, in educational psychology also, we study lot of facts. So educational psychology is a positive science. And another important thing is when lot of theories are developed as part of research in educational psychology, we apply those theories to the day-to-day phenomena. For example, when we take teaching learning process, when we take a classroom, whatever theories are developed in psychology, we apply them to the teaching learning process, to the classroom, and we see how we get certain results. So many concepts, many models of psychology are applied to classrooms, are applied to teaching learning process. So educational psychology is an applied science. Similarly, still the subject is developing, still the subject is growing. So we can say educational psychology is a developing or growing science. So when it comes to nature of educational psychology, students, all of you should understand that educational psychology is a science. Educational psychology, what type of science means? It is a natural science on one side and it is a social science on the other side, and also it is a positive science. It is also an applied science. When it comes to development or when it comes to growth of the subject, we can say it is still a developing subject and a growing subject. So when it comes to nature of educational psychology, you have to remember all these things. These reflects the nature of educational psychology. Okay, next, let us move to the next concept. If we want to see the relation of education to psychology, what is the relation of education and to psychology? Education and psychology, these two subjects are closely connected. Closely connected means take anything in education, definitely you find a lot of influence from the concepts of psychology, models of psychology, theories of psychology. So there is a close connection between the subject of education and the subject of psychology. There is a close relation between education and psychology. How can we find such type of close relation? Let us see. For example, if we take aims of education, so when we are framing certain aims for education, definitely those aims are influenced by a lot of psychological theories. So aims of education are influenced by the theory of psychology, the concepts of psychology. Similarly, when it comes to teacher, if you take a teacher, how the teacher involves in the teaching learning process, there will be a lot of influence from psychology on the teacher and also on the teaching learning process. So we take a lot of things into consideration while selecting a teacher and also while training the teacher, and when the teacher finally is selected and when the teacher enters into classroom, when the teacher is going to interact with the children at each and every place, we find the role of psychology. For example, if we take the selection process itself, if you find any entrance examinations for the teacher training courses, such as diploma in education or bachelor of education or master of education, take any course, any teaching course, always in the entrance examination, you can find an aptitude part that we call it as teaching aptitude. So, without assessing aptitude of a candidate, generally no university selects a particular candidate for the training of a teacher training course. So, aptitude is an integral part of selection process of teachers. You have to understand that. So, when it comes to aptitude in psychology, we study aptitude extensively. We study aptitude in a scientific manner. We study the factors which influence aptitude and the role of aptitude in the success of an individual in a particular profession. So, psychology and teacher are closely connected. Similarly, when it comes to curriculum, curriculum means it is nothing but the syllabus, whatever is framed for at high school level or college level or university level, wherever it may be, when there is a transaction, when there is teaching learning process is happening, there should be some base for that, which is known as the curriculum. Curriculum is the foundation for teaching learning process. Curriculum is the foundation for interaction between teacher and the student. So when we take curriculum, we find curricular activities, we find extracurricular activities, we find co-curricular activities. Entire these things are part and parcel of the curriculum. So how should be the curriculum? What type of lesson should be taken according to the level of the learner, according to the growth and development of a child? What should be incorporated in a specific curriculum? This particular direction we get some from psychology. So psychology and curriculum are closely connected. Similarly, if we take methods of teaching, how to teach a particular concept, which method is best to teach a particular concept, there is a lot of research in educational psychology on methods of teaching. We utilize that particular methods when a particular teacher is teaching a particular concept. That means psychology and methods of teaching are also closely connected. So there is close relation between psychology and aims of education. There is a close relation between psychology and teacher. There is a close relation between psychology and curriculum. There is a close relation between psychology and methods of teaching. Now, if we take textbooks, textbooks are the important sources of knowledge. In the entire curriculum, textbooks plays an important role, a major role. So, when we take textbooks, when we are framing textbooks, that means when the syllabus is designed, when the syllabus is transformed into various subjects, and when the textbooks are written, there also psychology plays an important role. That means in textbooks, what will be the presentation? How will be the presentation? When a textbook attracts a student, under what conditions a student can comprehend a topic better? Like that, various research-based concepts we find from psychology. So there is a close relation between psychology and textbooks. Another thing is there is a close relation between psychology and innovations. You say 21st century is the century of innovations. In our day-to-day life, we hear this one. But from where we can get the innovations? From where we can get the innovations means, again, from classrooms we get the innovations. From education we get the innovations. The education may be formal, the education may be informal, the education may be non-formal. Education is one of the important driving forces for innovation. Wherever we find an innovation, definitely we find role of psychology in innovations. That means innovation, when a particular individual is getting a creative idea, when a particular individual is getting a creative innovation, an innovative idea, lot of psychological principles are involved in that. How we process a certain information, how we come to the conclusion in an innovative manner, how we can find a new one. All these things depends upon our processing in our mind. So psychology and innovation are closely connected. And when it comes to teaching learning process, for example, when the teacher is teaching a particular topic, teacher uses various teaching aids supporting to teaching learning process. Teacher uses various aids. In that, audio visual aids plays an important role. Audio visual aids plays an important role in the teaching learning process. Nature of audio visual aids, the characteristics of audio visual aids, how to design audio visual aids, how to prepare audio visual aids, how to use them effectively in the classroom. Each and everything is influenced by the subject of psychology. So there is a close relation between psychology and audiovisual aids. Similarly, when a timetable is framed, whether it is at school level or whether it is at college level or university level, whatever it may be, when we are preparing a timetable for the transaction of the curriculum, for the effective delivery of the curriculum, a timetable is required. But at the time of preparing a timetable, how to prepare the timetable? If we want to incorporate various subjects in the timetable, what is the best combination of incorporating various subjects in the timetable? We get insights from psychology. So there is a close relation between psychology and timetable. Next, when it comes to school administration or college or university, whatever it may be, for that sake, any educational institution administration involves lot of supervisory methods. So when we talk about administration, definitely we have to talk about supervision. How to do supervision, how to administer an institution, how to supervise an individual, how to empower an individual, how to train an individual, how to take best work from an individual. Each and everything depends upon a lot of psychological principles. So we can say there is close relation between psychology and school administration, between psychology and the administration of an educational institution. So psychology influences a lot the administration of an educational institution. Next thing is, when it comes to discipline of students or discipline of educational institution, overall discipline, when we see, then also to frame discipline policies, to frame effective discipline policies, psychology plays a very important role. It plays a major role while preparing discipline policies of an educational institution. That is why psychology and discipline are closely connected. They are interdependent, simply we can say. And when it comes to evaluation, for example, when the students appear for a particular examination, how the examination structure should be, how the evaluation process should be. Each and everything is influenced by the principles of psychology, various theories of psychology. So psychology and evaluation both are closely related. Like this, you have to understand that when it comes to relation of education to psychology, you have to understand that psychology and aims of education are closely related. Psychology and teacher are closely related. Psychology and curriculum, psychology and methods of teaching are closely connected. Psychology and textbooks are closely connected, closely related, and psychology and innovations are closely related. Similarly, when it comes to teaching aids, psychology and audiovisual aids, there is close connection. Psychology and timetable preparation, close relation is there. Psychology and administration of an educational institution, close relation is there. Psychology and discipline or psychology and evaluation. Like this, when we take lot of things, we can find a close relation between education and psychology. So you have to remember all these things. So these are the important things. Students, if you have any doubts, I will clarify. Before that, let me summarize the session once again for the sake of latecomers. If any one of you joined in the class late, then let me sum up the session once again. Let me recapitulate the important points. So when it comes to the chapter educational psychology, this is the third chapter, third unit. According to your syllabus, this is the third unit. In this third unit, you have to study meaning and definition of psychology. Here, what I am bringing to your point is psychology is nothing but, if we want to see the etymological meaning of the word psychology, that means if we want to see the derivation of the word psychology, it derived from two words. The two words are, one is psyche, another one is logos. Greek roots these are. These are from Greek language. Psyche, it is Greek, and logos, it is also a Greek word. With the combination of these two Greek words, the English word psychology formed. So psychology is an English word. This particular English word came from two Greek words. One is psyche, another one is logos. The meaning, if we want to see the meaning of this word psychology, psyche means nothing but soul. Logos means study or science. So simply we can say psychology means it is the study of soul or science of soul. This is the etymological meaning of the word psychology. But you have to remember that at present we are not studying soul in psychology. Even though it is an integral part of various studies, we don't directly take the subject matter as soul in psychology now. That means a lot of changes happened in the definition of the word psychology. Initially, it was study of soul, but in the later part, soul was replaced by mind. So it became science of mind, or it became study of mind. But in the later part, some of the people, they came to the conclusion, in mind, there are various parts. For example, there is a conscious mind, there is an unconscious mind, there is a subconscious mind, which is easy to study. Means they felt that it is easy to study conscious mind. They called it as consciousness. That is why they defined the subject of psychology as science of consciousness or study of consciousness. But later, when we enter into 20th century, at the starting of the 20th century, many people in the field of psychology, they felt that it is better to take the behavior as the subject matter of psychology instead of soul or mind. That means for a better study, for a better understanding, they wanted to replace the subject matter of psychology, consciousness with behavior. So simply you can understand, initially there was soul, later there was mind, later they took consciousness. Now in the 20th century, they have taken behavior. At this present moment, if we want to define psychology, the most acceptable definition for psychology, the most acceptable meaning for psychology is science of mind and behavior. So students, you have to remember the meaning of psychology as science of mind and behavior. All of you know that there is a close connection between mind and behavior. That means behavior is, we can see the behavior with our eyes. That means we can find certain behaviors as external. That means we can see with our eyes. Simply we can say, if we want to see the body language of an individual, we can see the body language. That means body language is related to external behavior of an individual. But if you want to see the thought process of an individual, which is internal behavior of the individual, so it is not possible to see the internal behavior, that means thought process of the individual directly. But there are various techniques in psychology to study the thought process, to understand the thought process. That means simply we can say there are various techniques, various methods which are developed by psychologists in psychology to understand the mind and also to understand the behavior. So present today's psychology plays an important role in the 21st century because it is the science of mind and science of behavior. Understanding mind and understanding behavior is very important in our day-to-day life. So we have to see psychology as the science of mind and behavior. When it comes to educational psychology, simply you have to remember that if you want to give the meaning of educational psychology, simply you have to remember that educational psychology is nothing but it is a systematic study. Systematic study of what? Systematic study of development of an individual. Where we study this development of an individual means we study in an educational setting. That means educational setting means what do we find in an educational setting? We find a school, college, or university. We find classrooms. We find classes. Classes may be offline or classes may be online. Classes may be regular or classes may be in distance mode. Whatever it may be, whatever may be the educational setting. In all the educational settings, we study the individual. That means we study the student. We study children with special reference to educational settings by focusing on teaching learning processes. So this is the important meaning for educational psychology. It is one of the general meanings for educational psychology. Nature of educational psychology, we studied nature of educational psychology means nothing but what type of subject it is, educational psychology. When it comes to answer the question, what is the nature of educational psychology? We have to answer from different angles, from different perspectives. That is, first we have to see educational psychology as a science. I have repeatedly reminding you, science means nothing but science not only involves conducting experiments in the laboratory conditions, science also involves conducting field experiments. Science also involves the systematic collection of data, understanding and analysis. So when we see the word science from this perspective, we do each and everything in educational psychology. That means we conduct a lot of experiments in laboratory conditions in educational psychology. We conduct a lot of experiments in the society. We gather a lot of information from the society. We analyze that information in a systematic manner and we come to certain conclusion and we form certain concepts or certain theories in educational psychology. So everything happens from different perspectives in educational psychology. That is why we call the subject, we find the nature of the subject as a science, as a natural science, as a social science, as a positive science, and also as an applied science. Because Educational psychology is related to lot of facts. That is why we call it as a positive science. Educational psychology is related to lot of application to what? Application to educational settings, application to educational environment, application to teaching learning process, application to classrooms. So each and everywhere you find the role of educational psychology. That is why we find educational psychology as an applied science. So when we want to give the nature of educational psychology, when we want to understand the nature of educational psychology, we say educational psychology is a subject, is a science, which is an applied part. So it is an applied science. And finally, when you are studying nature of educational psychology, you have to remember that the subject psychology itself is a developing subject. The subject psychology itself is a growing science. So the subject psychology is one of the youngest subjects. That means still it is developing, still it is growing. So when the parent subject psychology is developing and growing, similarly the branch of psychology, educational psychology, is also a developing subject, is also a growing subject. That is why we call educational psychology as a developing or growing science. So this is very important. You have to remember. So we discussed about scope of educational psychology. What is the scope of educational psychology? Scope means nothing but what we are going to cover in the subject educational psychology. When we are studying educational psychology, what are the major topics? What are the topics related to various contexts in educational psychology? That gives the scope of educational psychology. So when it comes to scope of educational psychology, you have to understand that in educational psychology, we study the learner. Learner means student, whether it is a small child or whether it is a university student, whoever it may be, we study the learner in educational psychology. And we study the learning experiences. Under what circumstances we can give a better learning experience for the learner. We can give a better learning experience to the student. So this learning experiences is an important part which comes under the scope of educational psychology. Similarly, when it comes to learning process, how learning takes place in human beings, we study that one in educational psychology. What are the factors which influences the learning process? Whether physical environment influences the learning process, whether psychological environment influences the learning process, whether the textbooks influences the learning process, whether the teaching aids influences the learning process. Like this, we put various questions, we frame various questions, and we try to answer all those questions as part of educational psychology. So it is learning process comes under the scope of educational psychology, and also all the learning situations, all the learning environments, whether they are online or whether they are offline, distance mode, regular mode, whatever may be the learning situation, whatever may be the learning environment, each and everything under the scope of educational psychology. Another important part, another important component is the teacher. So in educational psychology, we study systematically not only the learner, we study systematically the teacher also. That means both teacher and taught form an important part in the scope of educational psychology. And also we defined the subject of psychology as study of mind and behavior. So when it comes to educational psychology, here also human behavior comes into picture. Human behavior means the behavior of student. What are the factors influences the behavior of a student? We study in educational psychology. What are the factors influences the behavior of a learner. We study in educational psychology at all levels. You have to understand that right from KG to PG, any educational setting, we study the human behavior in all the educational settings in educational psychology. So human behavior comes under the scope of educational psychology. And depending upon the growth and development of the child, at what age, what type of lessons are suitable, at what age, what type of learning experiences should be given to the learner, at what age, what type of teaching aids should be used as part of the teaching learning process. All these questions are answered by educational psychology. So educational psychology gives guidance to the teacher, to the teaching learning process based on lot of theories which are developed as part of growth and development of the learner. All of you know that depending upon the age, chronological age, physical age, we find lot of changes in the growth, we find lot of changes in the development. Growth means you have to understand that it is related to physical component. That means how the child is growing. It is related to physical growth. When it comes to development, you can see development in a broader sense. That means when it comes to intellectual development, how the intellectual development takes place. When it comes to moral development, how the moral development takes place in a child. When it comes to social development, how the social development takes place in a child. We study all these things in the educational development. So when we study the chapter growth and development in the subject educational psychology, we study moral development, we study physical development, we study intellectual development, we study social development, we also study language development. So lot of things are studied as part of growth and development of the child in the subject educational psychology. So we take growth and development in the scope of educational psychology. And also when it comes to heredity and environment, heredity and environment means take any child, each and every child is influenced by the genetic material, whatever the child is getting from parents or from forefathers. So that genetic material is very important. It plays a crucial role in the growth and development of an individual. So we study the role of heredity. At the same time, we also study the role of environment, whether it is physical environment or social environment, whether it is home or whether it is school, college, whatever it may be, each and every environment places an important role in the growth and development of an individual, in the growth and development of the child. So heredity and environment is one of the important chapters which comes under the scope of educational psychology. Similarly, when it comes to personality, in our day-to-day life, we talk about personality of an individual. In educational psychology, we study the nature and development of the personality. What are the factors influences the personality? How the personality of a child forms, each and everything is studied. We also find lot of individual differences in the children. You find lot of differences in the children, which are known as individual differences. Individual differences may be intra-individual differences or inter-individual differences. For example, if you take a child, the child may be very good at language, but the child may be very weak in mathematics, which is known as intra-individual difference. That means in the same individual, when we take a particular ability, in that particular ability, in one of the areas, the child may be very strong, whereas in another area, the child may be weak in that ability. So we find a lot of intra-individual differences. Similarly, when we compare individuals, when we take two children, we find a lot of differences. The difference not only related to physical development, the differences also related to other developmental areas, language development, social development, intellectual development, moral development. In anything, you find lot of differences. So individual differences is one of the important topics which we study in educational psychology. And also we study intelligence. Intelligence is one of the important components where we study in-depth concepts related to intelligence in educational psychology. Not only just the concept of intelligence, we also study how to assess intelligence, how to measure intelligence. It is also an important part in educational psychology. And also we study the role of guidance and counseling. All of you know that guidance and counseling is very important in educational settings, particularly in the 21st century. Guidance and counseling is very important. So this particular chapter, guidance and counseling, comes under the scope of educational psychology. So we studied the relation of education to other subjects. For example, aims of education, curriculum, methods of teaching, textbooks, innovations, teaching aids, audiovisual aids, preparation of timetable, doing school administration, discipline policies, evaluation. Each and everything is closely connected with psychology. So there is a close relation between education and psychology. Students, these are the important concepts which I wanted to share with you from the third unit, that is educational psychology. So all of you are advised to revise, to have a glance of the study material, whatever provided to you by Ambedkar Open University. Study the study material, your module on educational psychology. Study the third unit. Third unit, most of the important concepts we covered in this particular class. If you have any doubts, any one of you, you can express your doubts. I try to clarify the doubts. Any one of you, you can ask any doubts. Yes, I request the host to unmute the students so that they can express their doubts. If you are muted, you can type it. You can send it in the chat box. I will try to answer your questions. Yes, any one of you, if any doubts are there, I will clarify. Otherwise, we will end the session here. Yes, any one of you? I hope no one is expressing any doubt. So all of you understood the concepts very well. So once again, I am advising you to study the study material, study the module related to educational psychology, which is provided by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University. And not only third unit, you are advised to study the first unit and also second unit. So far we have completed 3 units. Suppose after reading all these 3 units, if you have any doubts, you can ask those doubts in the next class also. Thank you very much.